to him and his family.
I never spoke to Lancaster, and I never spoke to Rupp. And everyone, especially my high school and around, kept saying that if they really wanted me, I would have talked to Rupp and I would have heard from Lancaster. You know, they would have been, you know, on my doorstep.
Getting Mr. Rupp out of Lexington was like, it was near impossible.
He didn't go on a lot of recruiting trips now. Yeah. He believed that the mountains come through Mohammed.
Finally, under pressure from the Louisville newspaper, Rupp set up his own in-home visit. It happened to be on the same day Wesley had scheduled a speaking engagement.
We tried at that time to get him to set another date, and he said that he didn't need to talk to me. He wanted to meet with my parents, you know, which was quite common with college, you know, coaches coming in and talk. So we said, oh, that would be great, and I waited to say hello to him and introduce him to my mother and father, and they went in to talk, and I left.
By all accounts, the visit with Unseld's parents went smoothly.
We went into his home. Were treated fairly nice by he and his mother and by his father.
But Reed said afterwards Rupp had a bad feeling about it.
Mr. Rupp, we got in the car, and then Mr. Rupp said, he's not coming. I said, why? And he said, well, anybody would miss anything to spend some time with me.
And even though he knew prior to the trip that the youngster would not be there for the entire in-home visit, Rupp couldn't resist making a comment about it to a Louisville newspaper.
A day or two later, it was in the paper that I didn't have the courtesy to meet with him.
Who said that?
Rupp. So I figured he didn't really want me there, and there was no sense in me kidding myself.
One afternoon during the recruitment of Unseld, Rupp found himself in his office facing about a dozen boosters, including a former UK basketball All-American. They belittled Unseld's academic and athletic abilities and urged Rupp not to sign him or any other blacks.
They started in, and he said, I could see him getting angry. Thought it was back at some of those locker rooms after games. He looked around that room and pointed that finger of his, and he said, I want all you son of a bitchin' bastard racists out of this office and don't ever come back, and I don't care if you, they told him that he could have their season tickets. He said, give me your season tickets. They'll last about as long as a guy can drive down here from Toledo. And he said, you give me I don't want you in the Coliseum. You shouldn't be there.
It was a permanent separation.
They never spoke to him again, and he never spoke to them. Ever. Ever.
Reed later took UK President John Oswald to visit the Unselds, but it was no use. Wes Unseld, who now lives in Baltimore, where he and his wife own and operate a private elementary school, says he knew early that he likely would not be the first African American to break the racial barrier in either the SEC or the ACC.
I realized that I probably wasn't the type that would have served everybody's purpose in a situation like that, because my mentality was probably a little different in that if you spit in my face, I probably would spit back in your face. I don't know if I was the type that would have turned around and walked away.
Unseld's mother wanted assurances from Coach Rupp that if he came to UK, that Coach Rupp would be able to protect him. And Coach Rupp would not make that promise. And I think that was a very honorable thing for him to do, because he couldn't protect him. The year that Unseld was a senior at Seneca, 1964, was the year that the 3 civil rights workers were killed, murdered in Mississippi.
People during the 60s, they didn't want their kids going to Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia and playing. We were killing people, burying them in earthen dams, if you remember, blowing up black churches. It was a disgrace.
When I went to talk to him, the words he said to me still ring in my ears. He said, Larry, I don't want to be the first black person to go play in the South. And you know what? I understood that. I fully understood that, because it was a difficult time back then.
Unseld went on to a Hall of Fame career at the University of Louisville and the NBA. Rupp kept searching. By 1965, the pressure on Rupp had increased considerably. Dr. John Oswald had been on the job just more than a year as university president. To make certain UK qualified for federal funding, he had stepped up efforts to integrate the campus, both in academics and athletics. Rupp had made no secret of the fact that he was willing to accept a black player, and the rest of the SEC took note.
People, I think, thought that Kentucky should have been, or Coach Rupp should have been a pioneer because of his influence and his name. And yet it really wasn't in Coach Rupp's nature at his age, I think, to want to be a social pioneer, a guy that was going to, but the one thing that would have made him, and that finally convinced him to recruit African Americans, was that they could help him win.
Polling the conference and asking them if it's all right with them, and just getting that response from the northern schools, and they all felt that Kentucky should be the one to break the barrier.
Dr. Oswald's opinion was that he wanted all of the departments integrated regardless of ability. In those days, the term was referred to as a token black, and this is what Dr. Oswald was wanting. He was wanting my father to put a black youngster on the team regardless of whether he could play basketball or not.
Rupp balked at Oswald's urgings, instead insisting on selecting a black who fit the same sort of academic and athletic criteria as Wes Unseld in order to ensure success of the individual and the team.
He said, people say I'm a mean old man, and maybe I am, but I'm not mean enough to put some kid at the end of the bench just to be a token. He said, I'm not about to do that.
My father felt that it was important that the youngster play, that he be able to represent the university as a basketball player, that he was spending Commonwealth money on a youngster that should be able to earn it by being able to play and not just sit on the end of the bench and say, well, we have a black youngster on the team who can't play, doesn't know anything about basketball, and that's where they came to their differences.
He couldn't do that. He wouldn't do that. To have a token black, to have somebody whose feelings would be hurt, or or their parents, would feel the same thing, and so he wouldn't do that. If he was going to recruit anybody, that player was going to be able to play.
Not decorate the bench. No, that's what he said. He doesn't want one just to sit on the bench. He wants somebody who can play. Well, the white guys, pardon my language, but he wanted those that could play also.
The worst thing he felt that could happen at this time was if he did recruit a black player or a black youngster who could not play, and the youngster was on the end of the bench and he was unhappy, and then all the people that were for this happening were unhappy, and the kid could not play and he was just sitting there wasting time, and then they would say, well, look, he won't play the youngster.
Once again, Rupp thought he'd found his man, Butch Beard, who'd led Breckinridge County to the 1964 finals and the 65 Sweet 16 championship.
There was no question about it. As a matter of fact, if any of these critics of Coach Rupp would take the time to do it, they can go back and find in Sports Illustrated a story by Frank DeFord that ran in June of 1965 where he lauded Kentucky for leading the integration of Southern basketball, because everybody was convinced at that time that Butch Beard was coming to UK.
There were no black players in the Southeastern Conference. Butch Beard would have been the first. Sports Illustrated wrote about what a great thing it was that Kentucky was recruiting Butch Beard.
It was the alumni that at UK was really pushing for this to happen, okay? I had verbally said, I think I would give it a shot, all right? They had told me that there would be a possibility that one of my teammates would come along, so I would have somebody with me. My high school coach and I, we talked about it.
There was a lot to ponder for a 17-year-old faced with the prospect of becoming the first black to play major college basketball in the Deep South, where signs of oppression were still painfully apparent.
I do remember traveling in the South to Southeastern Conference meets, and I can remember
plain as day in Birmingham, Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama, excuse me, that somewhere near the track facility we were going to run, there was the official headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan, and big sign. And I remember signs about colored people, you know, and that in restaurants and stuff.
You didn't know what was coming. You know, we had always had to be on guard.
UK track star Jim Green, a world-class sprinter, was the first black athlete ever to graduate from an SEC institution.
I remember one time, I think we were going through Mississippi one time, and the coach said, "Oh, you gotta get down in the seat because the Klan is having a march."
A multi-sports star in high school, Green said Rupp asked him to play basketball, but his track schedule was just too demanding. Green had been the same sort of pioneer Rupp was hoping Beard would become.
When Coach Rupp was talking about that he could not guarantee my safety in the South, I had to think about that. And let's be honest. Now here's where you can call him whatever you want to call him. And maybe he was trying to scare me off. I don't know. But at least I think he was honest in the fact that he told my family and me that I don't know if I can guarantee his safety. And so therefore, at least he was up front there with that. Because he could have lied and made me feel like that it had been okay and something may have happened, you know, when we traveled in the South.
You have to remember what was going on in Mississippi and Alabama in 1964, 65, 66. The Ku Klux Klan could do whatever it wanted to. You couldn't protect an African-American player. If they wanted to kill him, they'd find a way to do it.
It was a dangerous thing. It wasn't just a matter of, I'm going to be uncomfortable playing basketball. I mean, this was going to be a dangerous thing.
As I made it known that I had interest in the University of Kentucky, it got to be real crazy for a 17-year-old in a small community, okay? There were people who would come up and knock on my door, never seen them before in my life. I want you to go to the University of Kentucky. You would be good. There were people who come up and drop the N-word on me and say, if you go, we're going to hang your ass and walk off, okay? So now as a 17-year-old, you're trying to figure all this out.
It wasn't his first brush with racism. As an 8th grader, Beard was going door to door selling Christmas cards to help raise traveling funds for his basketball team. He stopped at the house of a white teammate where Beard's aunt worked as a domestic, and he decided to try to make a sale.
I knocked on their front door. The mother came up and said, don't you ever knock on my front door again. You come to my back. Okay? Now, I walked off, and when my aunt came home, I asked her, why do you work for her? You know, why do you work for her? You know, I knew she needed the money, but why? And in a way, you know, I know she thought she was doing the right thing, all right? I had to endure that because I played with her son for the next 4 years, knowing that this happened.
That was still in his mind when Adolph Rupp came to call.
He had a marvelous time at Butch's house. He loved it. He had a great time with Butch's mother. He had a great time with Butch. And then we went down to the barber shop. And I thought, we got to get going. We were there a long time. We were there hours. And he was, put him on the stage and look out.
Coach Rupp came to my house a couple of times. I didn't feel comfortable with him, okay? Now, you know, he's been labeled everything from a racist to whatever. As a 17-year-old country boy, I had to feel at least comfortable in that situation because as my mother asked him about going to Tennessee and Alabama and Mississippi, he made some comments that I listened to. It wasn't like he says, well, you know, we're not going to take care of your son, Mrs. Beard. I just didn't know if he wanted to fight that particular battle at that time.
It was a matter of life, maybe death for Butch Beard to not go to Kentucky. Adolph Rupp had nothing to do with Kentucky not breaking the race barrier before anybody else. He wanted to do it.
On the first day recruits could sign a national letter of intent, UK hosted